A few weeks ago, we reviewed the new OLLO S5X. This headphone costs upwards of $400 and is specifically designed for studio work. OLLO Audio says that the S5X is supposed to help audio engineers mix and master for spatial audio. Today, we're going to delve into spatial audio and how the S5X performs in this format. Before we start, I want to emphasize that spatial audio is not widely adapted. While many streaming services claim they support a form of spatial audio, as we will talk about later in this video, the magic of spatial audio depends on the original recording. Generally speaking, the term spatial audio supposedly means 3D audio, and by 3D audio we mean audio that creates a sense of width, depth, and verticality. The idea is that you are able to hear elements as if you were at a distance, above or below you, or from ahead or behind. This traditionally has been done through surround sound systems involving at least 5 speakers and a subwoofer. You would have to place satellite speakers around you to create a sphere of sound and use an AV receiver to decode surround sound signal from your source, assuming the source audio came in surround sound. Several years ago, Apple released spatial audio for their headphones. This uses digital signal processing to create an artificial surround sound using stereo speakers in the headphones. Gyroscopes and sensors in the supported headphones help the software understand where you are in the real world, then adjust the music to compensate for head movement. Dolby Atmos is another type of spatial audio and predates Apple's technology. It does not need Apple's spatial audio to work, and Apple's tech does not need Dolby for theirs to function. There are a couple of key differences between these two. First, Apple's spatial audio works with their own headphones through Apple's devices and software. Dolby will work with any device, Windows, Android, iOS, and macOS. You merely need to have the supported framework. Second, the way these two technologies present 3D audio is a little different. While both create the impression that the music is all around you, they are not identical. For instance, Apple Spatial Audio uses the Mac source, say iPad, iPhone, or a Mac, as the center point. That source will always be the center channel. If you sit and listen with your MacBook ahead of you, then turn your head to the left, the sound in the left driver will decrease, making it appear as though the audio is entirely to the right or towards the MacBook. On the other hand, Dolby Atmos uses you as the center point. The direction you face is the direction of the center channel, and it does not matter where you move. In other words, with Dolby, elements are fixed in their respective 3D sphere. With Apple, elements can drift depending on where you are placed in the real world relative to the source. If you're on Windows, you can download the Dolby Atmos software. Dolby claims that this will let you experience Atmos audio through any headphone after you configure it, and we will talk about this a little later. In iOS, if you go into Settings, Music, you will see under the Audio section the option for Dolby Atmos. The default setting is automatic, and it will force Dolby Atmos whenever connected to one of Apple's headphones, or a supported Beats headphone, of course over Bluetooth. You can change this to Always On. If you do this, supported songs will play in Atmos and will work with any headphone, theoretically. Since we are talking about the S5X, I reached out to Rock Gulich at OLLO Audio and asked his recommendation on how to test the S5X. He said to use a smartphone or tablet and stream Tidal or Spotify. Of course, this also requires the source device to have spatial audio activated. Apple Music also has support for spatial audio. For best results, the audio has to be formatted for spatial audio. How many have actually been mastered for this is anyone's guess, but it is clear that spatial audio tracks are a vast minority. In short, whether you use Dolby Atmos or Apple's spatial audio, you have a way of experiencing this technology. I tested the S5X on both Windows and Apple devices. I wanted to figure out how well spatial audio works on both platforms. There is no DAC which supports spatial audio. The only thing which comes close is the Creative SFXI carrier, which supports Dolby Atmos for headphones, but this costs $1,000. For the Windows test, I used my Microsoft Surface Laptop Studio, which is Dolby Atmos certified. I downloaded Dolby's application and activated spatial audio for headphones. I plugged the S5X directly into the laptop and also used various dongle DACs, including the Zerta ITM03 and Low2Pa S1. And I also tested with the Chord Mojo and the Topping EX5. For Apple, I followed Rock's suggestion. I made sure to force Dolby Atmos on my iPhone 14 Max. I used the official Apple Lightning to headphone converter and plugged the S5X directly into it. I used Apple Music on iOS and Amazon Music Unlimited on Windows. I also used Spotify for both platforms. I needed a control group, tracks that are Dolby Atmos ready. The Dolby Atmos website lists several tracks that are 3D ready. Luckily, some of these tracks are also available on other streaming services, but without the Dolby Atmos algorithm. This let me compare in a few ways. First, I got to compare Dolby's official Atmos tracks against the same track offered on Apple Music or other streaming services which support spatial audio. Second, it let me compare spatial audio against regular stereo versions. For these comparisons, I used my passive AB switch and connected to my Windows laptop for the Atmos website tracks, then connected to my iPhone to compare against the alternatives. The ultimate question is whether there are audible differences between spatial audio on and off. And the answer is yes, there is a difference. But that difference depends entirely on the track. For Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, the official Dolby website version had a bit more clarity, placement, and separation compared to the Dolby Atmos version on Apple Music. Even after careful volume matching, the two did not sound identical. When I switched to the regular stereo version on Dolby's website and compared that against the Apple Music's Dolby rendition, the difference was present, but not necessarily night and day. This song simply does not require 3D placement. It's not as if Marvin was hanging upside down from the ceiling, so that the idea of using spatial audio for this track clearly wasn't necessary. But when I switched to Hot by the Pushers, the spatial audio rendition had more effect. Elements in this track did have different height and depth compared to the stereo version. Apple Music, by the way, did not have this Dolby Atmos version of the track and only presented it in lossless stereo. When the 3D elements are purposefully separated, it is an undeniable difference, which I did hear with the Dolby Atmos version. In Untie by Ultraviolet, the 3D rendition was noticeably different from the standard stereo. Unfortunately, this track was not available on Amazon Music or Apple Music, but was on Spotify, though not in spatial audio. So, you get the idea. The bottom line is that the stereo versions can sound different from the Dolby or spatial audio renditions, but how much of a difference depends on the track and whether it was actually mastered for 3D elements. Finally, I compared the S5X against the S4X and the Rode NTH100. Because I know that spatial audio is available on Dolby's website, I used those tracks. Since this website lets me switch between stereo and 3D on the fly, I could easily test the headphones. I plugged the headphones into my passive AB switch. I can answer a few questions about this experiment. First, yes, all three headphones did present the 3D sound through the Dolby Atmos website. When I switched to the stereo mode, all three clearly revealed the differences between the spatial audio and the regular versions. Second, all three headphones are reasonably neutral, though do not sound identical. Of the three, the NTH100 rendered the least amount of clarity and separation. The S5X presented the greatest. Third, every single track I played in normal stereo mode lacked the separation and placement of elements that were apparent in the 3D versions. When I got used to the 3D tracks, switching to stereo felt less engaging and, yes, less immersive. From all of this, I reach a few conclusions. The S5X can present Dolby Atmos tracks with ease, but so can other headphones that are not designed specifically for spatial audio mastering. The biggest difference I can determine is that the S5X has a particular tuning that seems to help parse out the various 3D elements. Of course, you might be able to find another headphone out there which does the same thing without the need to buy something specifically designed for this purpose. So, I did a head-to-head comparison of the S5X against the Austrian Audio Hi-X55, which is one of my gold standards for detail, separation, and placement. This is an analytical headphone and has a dramatically different sound signature from the S5X. But the idea here was to figure out if this could replicate what the S5X was doing with spatial audio. Once again, I used the same parameters as with the previous headphone comparisons. And you know what? The X55 rendered more clarity and detail in the 3D tracks, but this was in a particular way. The X55 essentially heightened the details that were already present and let me hear some details that were either not obvious or less obvious on the S5X. On the other hand, the X55 did not put elements more vertically or give me a greater sense of immersion than the S5X. In other words, I never felt that the X55 made music surround me any more than what I heard on the S5X. Instead, it was just clearer and rendered a bit more separation. All of this, to me, means that you should give Dolby Atmos a try with whatever headphones you have. If you thought you had to buy special headphones to achieve spatial audio, you really don't. At least not if you have a Windows PC and download the Dolby Atmos app. On Windows, the Dolby app can force all audio into its spatial audio algorithm, but this is not actually 3D audio. This is simply DSP applied and does not render any extra depth or verticality. There is some alteration to soundstage. So when playing YouTube or streaming directly from a browser, the Dolby app alters the frequency. But this is not spatial audio in the sense we were previously discussing. My experience with this app leaves me less than impressed with not 3D audio. It is basically DSP and sounds similar to EQ you can apply yourself. This application does not remaster a stereo track to parse out elements into different positions. It merely alters the sound of the original recording. The benefit of Dolby's app comes into play when you have actual spatial audio. When something that was mastered as 3D audio is played, this app will send that signal to the selected headphone output. When OLLO Audio says that the S5X was designed for spatial audio mixing and mastering, I believe them. I can understand why they wanted to do this and how it might be useful to some. But the reality is that the vast majority of our music is not in 3D audio format. While streaming services do support Dolby Atmos and Apple is pushing its own flavor of spatial audio, there's a big fat elephant left in the room. If the audio is not purposefully recorded for spatial rendition, then you are not really getting a whole lot out of the spatial audio experience. When tracks take advantage of this technology, it can be addictive, but we simply are not there yet. As for Apple's spatial audio feature in their headphones, I find it to be far less amazing in practice. I'm sure part of the reason is that I am used to stereo, and stereo is still king. The other part of my lack of enthusiasm for Apple's technology is that it just does not sound natural to me. Maybe Apple can tweak the algorithm, but until then, I'm not convinced. Dolby Atmos, on the other hand, is something I think could be beneficial if artists took advantage of it. To that end, I suppose the S5X is a useful tool, but it's not the only one. In my experience, I think you could use many other headphones for spatial audio mixing and mastering. Someone might end up preferring the S5X over the other alternatives, or maybe it won't make a big enough difference to them. In short, I think the S5X does a very good job with true 3D audio from Dolby Atmos. You don't need to buy the S5X for that purpose alone. However, I think the S5X in totality offers a very good package for neutral sound.